between sundown's finish and midnight's broken toll, we ducked inside the doorway. Thunder went crashing as majestic bells of bolts struck shadows in the sounds seeming to be the chimes of freedom flashing. Flashing for the warriors whose strength is not to fight. Flashing for the refugees on the unarmed road of flight. And for each and every underdog soldier in the night. And we gazed upon the chimes of freedom flashing. The chimes of freedom start pealing suddenly when we're unprepared for them, flashing on and off, like the Morse code of precarious life or the struggle to survive. Ukrainian civilians take up arms in spite of the fact that their strength as citizens lies not in fighting, but in contributing to society's civic progress. Refugees, unarmed and unprotected, hear the halting chimes of freedom and know that they have to take flight, unprepared, in the night. Of late, history has frequently taught us and caught us short, and we have been unprepared for the time of our lives. We were unprepared for COVID-19, of which the historian of science, Lorraine Daston, has said, it catapults us back to the 17th century, living in a moment of ground zero empiricism in which almost everything is up for grabs. So in the midst of a 20th century global pandemic, the epidemiological and ethical conundrums of the 17th century leap up to us like ghosts of the past, dancing in the future, and become part of our calculations of global morbidity and morality. The lessons we learned of the pandemic must not and cannot be forgotten. So the lesson here is not simply that history repeats itself. What is more important is that each repetition catches us unawares, unprepared, because what we believe to be repetition is actually a new combination, a new constellation of what we thought we knew, but never paused to ask how the issues that we thought were in the past, beyond their historical sell-by date, were not yet resolved. The lesson of my concept of what I've called the unprepared is that what you see is not what you get. We're unprepared, not without dire warning, for the 8.45 or 9 minutes that it took for a US police officer to kill George Floyd on a street corner in Minneapolis. This has, of course, happened before. But it's worth remembering that each time it happens again, a moral shock grips us, and the old becomes as new as the immediate moment of our lives. The repetition of remorse and regret is a relentless echo heard in the verses of the poet Claudia Rankine. In memory of Jordan Russell Davis, in memory of Eric Garner, in memory of John Crawford, in memory of Michael Brown, in memory, in memory, in memory, in memory, as she recounts the litany of those before George Floyd who have passed and been shot, been murdered or assaulted on the streets for nothing more than their race. We were equally unprepared for the approximately 20 million protesters of all colors and creeds who claimed liberty and security for Black lives and for the lives of minorities on American streets within the month of that incident of the George Floyd killing. Pandemics have a long collective and personal history of loss. American policing has a long history of racial injustice. However, the suddenness of the temporal moment of the pandemic and racial injustice, both events live in the wake of the shadow of death, demand attention now. The time of our lives is not a narrow now focused on the present. Now is a time scale caught in between a past that refuses to die and a future that is struggling to be born. To take a long view of history, as is the case with administrative negotiation and policy reforms, often overlooks the urgency of the now, the ethical and social imperatives of our contemporary lives. We pass the baton of change from generation to generation with a wish and a prayer that we will enter into a time of kindness, justice, and happiness. Too often, little happens and much is lost. The suddenness of time, what I've been calling the unpreparedness of our existence, is not simply a reflection of our lives. These critical measures of time functions like mirrors whose vanishing points are so close to our eyes that what seems like a distortion of our faces when the mirror is too close to us is indeed a portrait of the world that we have built and a world for which we must take responsibility now. The side-by-side proximity of death in life is a temporal paradox of the histories of our times. It repeats in the everyday emergencies of our present history: migration, climate change, racial death, terrorism, discrimination, and it severely tests the method and mettle of our critical thinking. How is it that we can simultaneously understand death as extinction and death as taking a risk that ensures the extensions of our lives, just indeed as refugees do, for instance, or migrants do? They take a risk of trying to become refugees, to cross a border. They know that that is important, and they know that too often, even fleeing for their lives and their livelihoods, it becomes impossible. Let us hear some of these voices of death in life, of survival, as they echo in our own times. Gaith, a Syrian refugee, describes himself as a being who he says is already dead, making the perilous Mediterranean crossing because, and I quote him, that means that there is a 1% chance of your leading an actual life. Roy Scranton, Iraq vet and American climate change author, and considers it crucial to cultivate daily reminders of the mortality of the earth itself, of the planet, to spur on our collective collaboration and agency in dealing with climate change. Ta-Nehisi Coates, African-American essayist and a renowned writer, feels himself to be among the survivors of some great national disaster as a black man, as a black person, some plague. I did not die in my aimless youth, he says, reminding us of Claudia Rankine's litany of men and women who have died with their lives as yet unfulfilled. These claims to the right to a flourishing life, imagined in the nightmare of life's extinction are instances of progress denied, lives socially and politically at risk, and the vast voids of disjunction that so often occur between opportunity to lead full lives and the obscurity and denigration with which many who do not have opportunity have to live. Time is of the absolute essence of our moral lives. Time is not only the historical event. Time is the moment in which, as I have been recording, we take and make a decision now in order to improve the circumstances in which we live. Globalization has too often accelerated the growth dynamic with the global agenda. This is perniciously prevalent in both the global north and the global south, and creates schizoid, bipolar tensions within countries and across cultures. People who are seen as belonging to underdeveloped regions, who are peripheral peoples, populate cheap markets, and marginal workers who accept low wages are the very subjects worn down by the burdened life of global ascendancy. 2 decades ago, in 2002, the economist Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize winner, warned of the neo-colonial implications of free market fundamentalisms combined with the struggle for superpower sovereignty. In their wake, we now have a rash of related fundamentalisms that fester on the global body politic. Religious fundamentalisms, populist fundamentalisms, ethno-nationalist fundamentalisms. People talk in the world today frequently of decolonization. And I would like to remind you, as I remind myself frequently, that decolonization takes its cue from the lives and times of the exiles of global accumulation and acceleration, whether it is temporal or technological. In his encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, Brothers All, the Pope refers to this tendency as creating throwaway populations in the name of progress or profit. Obsolescence is no longer restricted to things that slowly become technologically anachronistic. Today, there are people, not things, who are often considered obsolescent, out of time and out of place, littered on the sidewalks of the highways of development. Marginal and minoritized peoples are part of a cruel paradox of global dominance. They are kept in a state of arrested development by foreign bodies or their own governments, but they are put to work, nonetheless, as motors of global development. Even when they are disregarded in the story of national progress, they are indeed crucially important to the creation of national progress. National minorities are frequently undocumented, and their invisibility as domestic help in the US or their anonymity as wage labor in other parts of the world is struck from the public record of global progress and human probity. To be a migrant, quite often, working in another country for the benefit of that country and also to protect their own rights is often seen as a kind of secondary labor market. It is often seen as a secondary form of life, whereas in fact, it is often those who are unnamed and unrecognized who are actually carrying forward the responsibilities of citizenship. When globalization divides the world between high-tech hubs and failed states, we create what His Holiness the Pope called throwaway cultures that relegate the unprofitable to the dustbins of history. A national consciousness, of which we talk a great deal today, is something that Frantz Fanon argues is not nationalism and is alone capable of giving us an international dimension. National culture is often built on the politics of difference. It is often built on looking at the international needs of the planet, of the world, in terms of development, in terms of poverty, in terms of injustice, in terms of overcoming these great global problems, and to negotiate these tensions internationally and nationally is to cross and recross various thresholds that open the door to a moral politics of care and hospitality, in which the ideas of creative industries and cultural institutions find their moral compass and their historical moorings. I'm inspired in this regard by the record of African countries in cultivating a sense of home and hospitality for refugees. Those countries in the North and South who see themselves as icons of global success have been far more parsimonious in their welcome of the dispossessed and the displaced. Africa rises to the challenge of what I call vernacular cosmopolitanism, invested in the values of survival rather than the norms of sovereignty. There are many parts of the world where this welcome to people who are unable to find lives of dignity, lives of possibility in their own countries, have been offered these opportunities. And I think we should salute them and we should greet them with thanks and also take from them the challenge of increasing this kind of equity of those who cannot afford to live the lives where they were born. The issue here, of course, is in their new worlds, they must receive dignity, they must receive equity, they must receive recognition. The majority, however, of refugees and migrants are cosmopolitan, worldly, global, in a tragic sense. They are displaced from one country to another, often from one refugee camp to another, with the border police at their backs. And yet, as we have seen, over the generations, these migrants, these exiles, these refugees have a profound compulsion to survive and live and maintain a measure of integrity and hope wherever they manage to resettle. They build their new lives in foreign countries, within cultures of difference, by engaging with bewildering public norms, legal ideas, strange social customs. But the will is to survive and to make a life in the company of others. And this is what I call a form of minoritarian cosmopolitanism, vernacular cosmopolitanism, that manifests a political will to establish neighborly relations in traumatic and challenging conditions. Increasingly, of the national and the foreign, the civilian and the migrant, a common good that weaves itself as a basket of what we call a basket of rights and responsibilities. Not a forceful assimilationist or punitive common good, but a common good that brings together and creates a convergence of diverse interests and different identities. Citizenship needs to be rethought from its core ideals. It is important for all citizens across nations who may have legal rights to be able to have rights of public movement and public discourse. They're often denied the rights of ethics, of public recognition, although they have legal rights. But I believe that you are only as free as you believe yourself to be when you can gather at will in the public square or return home in the dark as a woman, secure in the knowledge that you will not be assaulted or arrested. We seem to have forgotten that this is the moral and ethical core of the citizens' and residents' right to free and secure movement. The political and legal securities that citizenship provides at its best are built around the matrix of what it means to be rightless and stateless and how to avoid that powerless predicament. You might as well say that really at the core of citizenship around the world, across history, is the fear of not having those rights. So we build those rights around the fear and the anxiety of losing them. If the citizen has standing, refugees and minorities are often left by the wayside, or they are left and forgotten abjectly in detention camps. In these moments of indignity and inhospitality, we must listen carefully. Listen for the chimes of freedom flashing with which I started, the music that Dylan brought to our ears in such an impressive way for our times. Each citizen today who lives in peace and security, we must not forget, is a neighbor to another who is neither. Each citizen today who lives in peace and security is also living next to the 86 million displaced peoples in the world who are in fact the size of a country, even if they do not have a nation. Each world citizen today is in part a refugee, something of a migrant, living side by side with a family without a home, a child without an education, a society without the basic right of consent. When we talk about global citizenship, we have to think of those who suffer these conditions of want and these conditions of human status, because that is what rights give you. They give you recognition. They also give you status as a human being. And if we think of those who do not have the rights that we have as belonging to another country, as we live indeed in the midst of our own lives of profitability and productivity, then we must become more aware of this other country. And we must become more aware that we also belong to this other country. And it demands our ethical duty and determines our collective global social destiny. And in that spirit, I believe, we aspire to new horizons of hope in this moment, in this hour of the needs of our times, and in this moment where we are grappling to understand the times in which we live. Thank you very much for your attention. I would look forward to any further discussions on a future occasion. But thank you today for listening.